My name is Lusanda, as mentioned. I am a permit officer for alien and invasive species for the Department of DFFE, so that I don't butcher it as well. And today I'm here to tell you about the permitting process in terms of the alien and invasive species regulations. So the regulations were published and came into effect in 2014, but they were recently amended in 2020, and those amendments became effective last year, March. And there's basically two main reasons for the regulations. One is to regulate invasive and potentially invasive species within the country, and the second purpose of the regulation is to prevent the illegal introduction of alien and potentially invasive species into the country. So, how do we go about achieving those two aims? For the first purpose, which is the regulation of invasive and potentially invasive species within the country, the first thing that was done was to identify the species and do risk analysis, and those that were found to be invasive were then listed under the NIMBA AIS list. And they were listed into 4 different categories: Category 1A, 1B, Category 2, and Category 3. If a person is in possession of a Category 1A listed species, that means that they need to get rid of that species immediately. If they are in possession of a 1B species, they need to control the species. Based on the regulation, control means to either get rid of them immediately, but where it's not possible, then they need to prevent the spread. If a person is in possession of a Category 2 species, which is those species that I'm going to talk about the most today, then they cannot carry out any restricted activity without a permit. If a person is in possession of a Category 3 species, then they are exempted from requiring a permit, but they cannot conduct any other restricted activity. So what are those restricted activities? Restricted activities include the importing of the species into the country, being in possession, growing or breeding in any way, conveying or moving the species, selling the species or trading in or buying anything like that, even accepting as a donation or a gift. It also includes the spreading or allowing the species to spread outside your facility. It also includes the releasing of the species, the transfer of the species from one catchment to another, the discharge or dispensing of any in a waterway. Say you are keeping a species in a tank, and then now you want to get rid of the water, so you discharging that water in a waterway is a restricted activity. Catch and release of the species, introducing the species on an offshore island, and the release of the species when it comes to freshwater invertebrates as well. It's a restricted activity, so it can only be permitted if it's a Category 2 species, but from any other category, it is prohibited. Okay, so if these are invasive species, then the question is, why not just get rid of all of them? Why do we have some that we permit people to keep or conduct certain restricted activities on? So, the issue is that, I think Kay also spoke about it a bit with the jacaranda issue. Some of these species do have financial value or a social value. And in most cases, we then need to find, we need a way to find the X right there, a way that we can protect the environment, but while allowing people to enjoy the benefits that come with the species, whether it's a financial benefit or people want to keep it as a pet. And that is where the permits come in, because the permits allow us, because they come with conditions, they therefore allow people to enjoy the benefits that they are enjoying with the invasive species while also protecting the environment. I'll make an example with Nile tilapia. Now, tilapia is known to be invasive because when it's introduced into a river where Mozambique's tilapia, which is our native species, is already there, it outcompetes the Mozambique's. But if you keep it in a res system, then the water is kept within your facility and you will not introduce it into the natural streams, which reduces the risk, basically. So that is where or why permits are important. There are 118 Category 2 listed species. Most of them are plant species, followed by mammal species, reptiles, freshwater fish, followed by marine invertebrates, and last ones are amphibians. These 118 are not necessarily Category 2 throughout the country. Some of them are listed in certain provinces and not in others. Okay, so now that we know which species require permits and why, how do you go about getting the permit? The first thing you need to do is identify whether or not you are in possession of a Category 2 species, and you can do this by going through the list, the NIMBA AIS species investive list. Once you have identified that you are in possession of a Category 2 species, then you need to obtain our application form, which you can do so online, or you can email us at aispermits@dffe.gov.za. You also need to do a risk assessment. Because remember, you are the one that wants to keep the species even though it's invasive. So it is your responsibility to let us know why you want to keep it and what is it that you are going to do to reduce the risk associated with the species. Once you have filled in the application form and done the risk assessment, you then send us the application and the risk assessment into the same email address as mentioned. The application form, some of the things that are important to note is that the application form must be accompanied by a certified ID copy, and page 5 of the application form does need to be signed under oath, and there is an application fee associated with applying for the permit. Once we've received your application, we then verify your documents. Now this includes verifying your risk assessment, which means we will visit your facility to make sure that you do have measures in place to reduce the risk. Once that is done and we are happy, then the application and the risk assessment will be sent to the province that you are in for their inputs. And once the province sends us the inputs back, a decision will be taken to either issue the permit or object. If we object, you will be notified in the form of a letter, official letter, as to why we cannot issue the permit. Okay, so we spoke about the first part of the regulations and how we go about achieving the purpose. And the second purpose is to prevent the illegal introduction of alien and potential invasive species into the country. This is also achieved using the permit process. There are only two differences. So the form is exactly the same, but the risk assessment that you need to do is different. Instead of you filling or answering the questions that we have in your facility, you need to get a professional who is registered with SECNAPS to do the risk assessment for you. And instead of us sending the application to the province for their inputs, it is sent to ASRAP for their inputs. We also issue permits for research purposes. The difference here is that you can apply, if you're doing research, you can apply for other listed species, say in category 1A or 1B or 3, instead of just the category 2. And instead of a risk assessment, you need to submit your research proposal. And the permit, okay, so the permit for possession is and other restricted activities such as breeding and selling is valid for 5 years. But when it comes to conveying the species, it's only valid for 3 months. And during that 3 months, you can only convey once. But you also have another convey permit that's valid for a year if you're a person who needs to convey more than once. But when it comes to research permits, they are valid for the duration of your project. The fees associated with applying for the permit, if you want to import a species into the country, it's 200 per species. For all other restricted activities, it's 100 rand. For the renewal of a permit, it's 50 rand per species. And for appeals, it's also 50 rand per species. For interest's sake, in the past financial year, we have received a total of 385 applications, and we've issued 389 permits. Out of those total, only 22 were from Mpumalanga, and only 13 permits were issued in Mpumalanga, which I am not sure if that's because Mpumalanga doesn't have many category 2 species, or a lot of people here do not know that they need to apply for a permit. Thank you.
Well done, Lusanda. Thank you very much. We now have an opportunity from the floor if there are any questions with regards to the permitting. All right, let me go. As I said, speak clearly. Stand up, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and then your question to Lusanda, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Roland Jones from Barberton. I'd like to ask, SAPI has changed the pine plantations into gum plantations in our catchment area, and we are really desperate for water in Barberton. For the first time in 7 years, with all the rain, our dam has overflowed. Have they got to have permission to do this? And have they applied for it?
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know specifically when it comes to SAPI, but what I can say is that those two, both plants are category 2. So I'm not sure if they actually have permits to change the species, but they can apply for the permit. But also, we do not issue permits within 32 meters of a river. So if they have the plantation, but they must remove any trees within 32 meters of the river.
Can I help you there? Plantations are exempt. Existing plantations are exempt from the legislation, so a bit like the jacaranda in urban areas, SAPI would have identified all their plantations, they become immediately exempt. So the government has an ability to go in and check to see whether any of the trees are coming out of their plantations. So the enforcement and inspector guys would be looking for trees that jump the plantation fence, proverbially. But the actual legal issues are that within that plantation they can plant whatever they like, they are exempt, and it's done for jobs, it's done for economics, it's done for, you know, they fall into the agricultural economic story of jobs are important.
Except of course in riparian zones. Do we have any other questions? There we go.
Good morning, Moses Mashabane from SANBI, the Directorate of Biodiversity Evidence. Lusanda, I just wanted to quickly ask something regarding the risk assessments, especially when it comes to the importing of new species. Are any of those risk assessments actually in the public domain, like the website for DFFE?
Maybe Shashika can help me with that. I'm not sure if they are available for the public.
No, they're not available for the public. As a matter of fact, we've actually even had a couple of emails, quite hectic ones from Gxalo to say, terribly sorry, they're still being thought about and debated and discussed, and they are not for public consumption. We even have difficulty getting them to be identified in the working groups. But the people who are working on those risk assessments are mostly the scientists, and we have a fair idea. I've seen the lists of what risk assessments have been done, but they certainly haven't been released to the public, no. But we would love you all to write to the government and say, please, can we have them? Because we would like them released in the long term. There is a job available. I'm not too sure whether it's closed or not, but Sandy is advertising for an ASROP, which is the risk assessment group. So they're looking for a secretary for the risk assessments to administer and monitor them, send them out to scientists, collect them back. And so one hopes that once that position is filled, we will be able to, that Sandy will be able to keep the show on the road and get them all out to everybody. Good question, thank you.
It was actually more regarding with the risk assessments that we actually talked about when it comes to like an individual applicant.
No, the
whenever, yes, the risk assessment, just whenever they get maybe like a risk assessment practitioner to do a risk assessment on that species, and you know in some cases you'll find that it's actually a new species that has not been introduced into South Africa. So it would actually be nice if those risk assessments, they can actually be made available, so that even other students, whenever maybe in future you're doing your own studies on the new species that is actually naturalized, you know, and we can actually keep track in terms of when are the species actually introduced, so that even other stakeholders, if they're actually like a bit of conflict in terms of that information is actually made available. So, but I do understand the point with the other risk analysis, especially for species that have been already in the country, and they're actually listed in terms of like the revision and the sorts. So it was more particular in terms of the risk assessments that applicants actually do on their own for the introduction of new species.
I think what Kate just said is pretty much the same. They're not available. But should you, if someone else, if it was approved, and should you apply in future, then you won't have to do the risk assessment. Because now we do know that you can bring it into country. It's safe to bring it to the country.